What is going on, y'all? KM Best here. We're going to take a look at a deck that I'm sure you've played against, but you might not have had any idea what they're doing. This is a deck that is localized to like the top infinite of the NA server. I think a lot of people there have been playing it, but it hasn't really trickled down in a meaningful way yet. So let's talk about it with the creator of the deck, YoWoody. So this is the list, and I am joined by YoWoody, who created the deck to explain it. To me, this reminds me the most of a sort of spiritual successor to the Dagger Doc clog lists, which no longer have access to Dr. Octopus, so now have to be clogging in different ways. Hawkeye Kate Bishop helps you do this, the Goblins and Ravonna help you do this, and I think this is a deck that people will have seen. People will watch this video and they'll be like, what is KM talking about? Then they'll see the list and they'll be like, oh, that's what this is. That's kind of why I wanted to do this video. You made this deck on day one of the new season. What is the process that you went through that arrived at this point?
Okay, so that is actually an interesting question that I was hoping you would touch on because I actually made this deck the day before Kate Bishop came out. I was making a bunch of different Kate Bishop and Marvel Boy Cooks. I had like 8 or something. I did the like every start of every season, but it did not have Kate Bishop in it, and it wasn't even supposed to be a Kate Bishop deck. I was just toying around with the idea of like a dagger bounce Kate Bishop deck, and then in my head I was like, what do we play along that like Iron Fist dagger Ghost Spider turn 6? What's like a good 2 energy play? And then I just thought of Hazmat, and I was like, wait a minute, why has nobody done like the
Yeah.
Iron Fist dagger Ghost Spider Hazmat thing? That is like the perfect turn 6 after a Ajax turn 5. And then like the deck just kind of clicked from there, right? Like you have the Iron Fist dagger Ghost Spider stuff, which is good with like the goblins and clog, because like Iron Fist and Ghost Spider synergize with those, and then clog is good for getting a bigger dagger. The whole list just kind of clicked. There's like some small flex slots I would consider, like Hobgoblin, Cassandra Nova, cards that are probably the most flexible, I would say, if you're not seeing a ton of Airsham, but you probably are. So it's probably really only Hobgoblin, but I still like him in the list. And Kate is like by far like the first day I was just playing all these other decks, and then somebody in my chat, member of the community, Jimmy Dickens, was like, "Where's the uh Ajax dagger list you sent
Right.
yesterday?" And I was like, "Oh, that wasn't even a Kate deck, but I guess you're right. She is kind of insane in this."
Yeah.
And then I took out like Viper Hood for Kate and something else, and yeah, it just popped off.
Yeah, the reason I wanted to do this deck highlight specifically is like I keep seeing this deck and I don't think I've seen anyone cover it. And I think like specifically there's going to be people who watch this video and they're like, "Oh, that's what that Ravonna Goblins player was doing to me. That's what their top end was. I get it now." And I wanted to specifically talk about the delineation between turns 1 through 5 and turn 6 in this deck, because half the deck is you play it during the game and the other half the deck is you play it on turn 6, right? So it's like
Yeah.
you are playing Ravonna and White Widow and the Goblins and Kate Bishop. Those are your during the game cards. Cassandra Nova, of course, whenever you want, basically. If you're against Arishem, actually, I've kind of noticed that sometimes you save it just because they don't know you have it. But
Yeah.
the other thing that like you have here is just a very dedicated turn 6 package that requires a lot of discipline to actually save. So when you're in the situation where you aren't really doing much unless you expend one of your turn 6 cards, how do you approach those spots? Are they common enough that you have to think about them? Or is it the kind of thing where it's like, all right, I got unlucky, go GG, go next?
I mean, I would say that they are fairly common, and like even in the wins, they're fairly common. Sometimes you just need to like play out a sage early for, 6 power or
Mm-hmm.
something. Sometimes you need to just play out your Cassandra early against an Arishem deck because you don't have anything else to do and you're looking at your hand. You're like, well, this is my turn 5 and 6 in my hand, so I kind of just have to force them to have an answer to this. I can't, be greedy and get the cube equity and stuff. And uh, that is why another reason why Kate is actually just such an insane card in this deck is
Yeah.
because she just gives you things to do. Like you play Kate on 2 and you get like Pim Arrow and Basic Arrow, that's not great. That's the low roll, but at the same time, like if your hand was like Ravona, White Widow, Kate, you still have stuff to do now. Like you're biding time until you draw into those insanely swingy endgame resources, and that can actually just like save you not only like in terms of allowing you to have stuff to do, but just having stuff to do can allow you to feel like you can stay in the game until you get what you need. And it results in like a higher win rate because normally if you just had like set it and forget it 2 drop and then like your mid game curve is kind of scuffed and somebody snaps you, you would just have to go. But Kate a lot of times can give you just like these small pieces to play and then like you actually do draw into it and you would never have stayed in the situation if your curve wasn't being padded by the stuff she gives you.
Yeah, I think like one of the things I've noticed playing a lot of Kate Bishop is one of her big advantages is she lets you take more game actions. So when you have like a bad draw, you have like a deck that's like half cards you don't really want to play. She lets you just sort of fill up your curve with stuff. And you see that in a variety of decks that play Kate. Like any kind of deck that's playing Kate is taking advantage of in some way. Athena deck even is taking advantage of it. Like, oh, I got more stuff to do that allows me to do my Athena thing a little bit more. And this deck takes advantage of it because it is built in such a like split delineated way. One of the things I've noticed people doing against me that I think is probably bad with this deck is like running daggers out there early, like on turn 5. Because I run, a lot of my decks are playing Shadow King, a lot of my decks are playing Shang-Chi. You don't really have the luxury of doing that, but I still see people do it. What would you say is the hardest lock to turn 6 card in this deck? Is it Hazmat? Is it Dagger? What's the one that's the most locked to turn 6?
It's definitely Dagger. Like you can get away with like turn 4 hazmat on like kind of a cluttered board a lot of the time. Like you could go like, you know, Kate into like White Widow hazmat and stuff if there's like already some cards on the board. A lot of people are playing Squirrel Girl and a lot of 1 drops and stuff right now. So
Mm-hmm.
like hazmat early like that is not bad into like an Ajax or like a turn 5 play, and I hope you top deck Ajax on 6 or whatever. But like Dagger, I said this in my stream yesterday, but like the biggest advice I would give somebody playing this deck is to act like Dagger got hit by Baron Mordo. Like literally act like your dagger got hit by Baron Mordo, and it will pay off because people see like, oh, I can get a 9 power dagger if I Iron Fist it right now, and then you do that on turn 3, and then your turn 4 is like a Sage, and then Ajax, and your turn 6 is like Hazmat and nothing. So you really do get the power like back in opportunity cost like twofold. Like if you just hold the dagger, you will be rewarded for it like 90% of the time. And there are certain like location based instances, or like for instance if you're going up against a Sandman or something, that can make you want to play dagger out early, but those are much fewer and farther between than I see people play like they are.
Yeah, I do think that's true. One thing that really strikes me about this deck is it looks like it's super complex, but it's actually just very heuristic based. Like, okay, here are your turn 6 cards. Your nut draw is Ajax on 5 into your turn 6 cards. Cool. And then your other nut draw is your dagger stuff in a Sage, and maybe you can get that even cheaper with a Ravona. Cool. We did it, right? Like, it actually, a lot of clog decks tend to read as very complex and then not be that complex. But I think this is kind of the apex of the form because it's very clearly delineated between cards you want to play early and cards you never play early. And I think that that's just like a really interesting way to have this deck enter the metagame, because I think one thing that people may think when they see this video is, oh, that looks really complex, I don't want to play it. And we're both here to tell you, actually, just don't play stuff till 6, you'll be fine. Like,
Yeah.
what you're really leveraging here is that nobody really has the ability to play around a 12 to 24 power dagger and also a hazmat and also a sage. And those are your options on turn 6, and they're so widely varied that you have no idea what's going to happen to you at any given time. It's just a deck that presents an incredibly scary final turn that can approach it however they want. Moving on to the card by card breakdown. Ghost Spider has a very defined role in this deck. I think I'm going to be able to ask this question once for either Ghost Spider or Iron Fist, so let's start with it. Which one of these is better, and why is it Ghost Spider?
Yeah, I mean, Ghost Spider is definitely better than Iron Fist in the deck, like easily better than Iron Fist for a lot of different utility reasons. Um, like Ghost Spider allows you to play closer to the chest, first of all, because like if you have to tee up a dagger or you want to like move an Ajax into a certain lane or something like that, and you do it with Iron Fist, it's coming earlier in the curve. It's kind of like blocking you from doing other stuff. And people can see it coming. But with Ghost Spider, you're doing it like same turn most of the time. But then also it's just like Ghost Spider is better for repositioning your goblins a lot of the time because like you can retroactively reposition a goblin if like I've done this before where it's like you do like you have Ravona down and then turn 4 is like White Widow Green Goblin and then your opponent has 2 cards in like the right lane. So turn 5 you do Ghost Spider the Green Goblin over and then Hobgoblin that lane. It's kind of a it's very sneaky play, and you are like never able to do that with Iron Fist because Ghost Spider, like you can Ghost Spider a card from any lane to any other lane. You're not locked into the weird play restrictions that Iron Fist has. And then also, Ghost Spider is insanely good for juking with your Ajax because if somebody is like a lot of the time you're like if somebody is staying in this game it's because they're going to, especially if you have priority, they're going to either Shang my Ajax or they're going to rogue it or they're going to Enchantress it or something. So if you Ajax on 5 into like this is like one of the best non Ravona or Dagger turn 6s where you just Ghost Spider your Ajax to another lane because Ajax is so massive that like it doesn't matter where you move him, he's just going to win that lane.
Mm-hmm.
And then you just do Hazmat Sage, and that is like a banger cube stealing turn 6 where Ghost Spider almost acts as kind of like an armor or something in this list to help you protect your Ajax from tech cards too.
Yeah, or like in the Phoenix Force list when your opponent is staying on a Nimrod and they're going to cosmo the
Yeah,
lane or whatever, right?
yeah,
Like that's it's a similar vibe there. The one thing I wanted to dive a little bit deeper on though is the Ghost Spider Goblin thing cuz I genuinely think like you talked about that like it's something everyone knows about. I don't think everyone knows about that. You can goblin something and then Ghost Spider it. The Ghost Spider will
yeah.
hit the goblin even though it's on your opponent's side of the board. You can use this to move your clog around the board to better locations. It's a really, really strong thing to do. And it's part of the reason why just getting a goblin down can sometimes be better than getting it in the right spot because you can, for free, attempt to move it to the right spot with basically no cost the next turn, thanks to Ghost Spider. So this guy's mostly just here for Dagger existing. Does he ever really do anything else, or is it like sometimes you're gonna like sage a clogged lane and move it into a non-clogged lane, just like stuff like that? Like I'll get my Ajax into this kiln that closed on turn 4 kind of deal. It's more
Yeah.
just like it's like sometimes he has uses for him, but mostly he's just Dagger.
Yeah, yeah, that is pretty much exactly accurate. The 2 things you said were, like, going to be anecdotes I
Yeah.
use, like, "Oh, you can move Ajax into,
Yeah.
kiln or
It's like,
whatever,
yeah,
and
you could do
you
that. I
can
like
move
that's
a
yeah.
Sage."
Yeah, like that's what the card
Uh,
says. Like it does
yeah,
say you
yeah.
could do that, right? Like, yeah.
I'd say, like, the one other kind of, like, meta relevant use, Iron Fist has is that, like, Cassandra Nova is
Mm.
coming down on turn 6 a lot of the time against Erishim.
Hmm.
And Airshim is running Alliance, so if you suspect they're not going to play for a lane or they're clogged in a lane, you can Iron Fist like a clogged off lane and then push your Cassandra into the lane you suspect they might Alliance in order to play around that, which actually comes up pretty frequently against Airshim because Airshim is everywhere, so that's pretty much like the only like special use case I'd say he has that's like kind of more meta nuance. But outside of that, yeah, he's just dagger enabler. He can move the goblins sometimes. Like it is nice to be able to like Iron Fist and then Goblin, and then like if it's a Space Throne game, you can't really Ghost Spider a Goblin into the Space Throne. So Iron Fist is good for that kind of stuff where you have to play like chicken with your goblins and not full commit with them.
Hmm.
But other than that, yeah. just worse Ghost Spider.
So we've already covered play like Dagger got Baron Mordoed in this deck. How important is Ravona's discount, this card starting with 0 power, to this card being powerful? Not necessarily just on it, but in terms of allowing it to have good combinations of cards that go with it on the final turn of the game.
Yeah, I would say Ravona's discount on Dagger is actually probably the most important pre-turn 6 because
Hmm.
a lot of the time you could be leaning on an Ajax top deck on turn 6. So you are forced to do something on 5, and that something is pretty much reverse your turn 5 and 6. So you can
Hmm.
go like Iron Fist, Dagger, Ghost Spider, Hazmat on 5 because of the Ravona discount, and then you could like top deck an Ajax on 6, or you could just do, like uh Iron Fist or like Hazmat, Iron Fist, Dagger, and then like hold, and then on 6 you could do a Ghost Spider and do an Ajax or something like that. And I'd say uh that's where Ravona's discount on Dagger is the most prevalent, is actually earlier in the game. And then one other way I would urge people to look at Dagger is like you kind of have to look at her as like a Thena or a Angela, where she is like an early game scaler, and the way you scale her is by holding her in your hand. Like she's building value in your hand. She's competing with these big Thenas and the big Angels and stuff like that, and she's scaling by your opponent playing cards to the board and you drawing the cards that really juice her up, like your opponent drawing a kitty for Athena or something. So you can kind of like look at it in parallel with those types of scalers, and like the way she scales is your opponent puts stuff on the board, and since she is super cheap, she's scaling off of your opponent's early game instead of like your early game.
Reverse Angela. Let's
Yeah,
go.
yeah.
I feel like we can both wax poetic about Hazmat Ajax at this point. Like, what is it about this combination of cards that makes it so potent in these various spots? Is it just the lack of slots it takes up for the massive power it generates? Is it the fact that it also works with clog? Like, it's not lost on me that clog has become a bigger part of the metagame post Ajax, and Hazmat has built in synergy with that. And I guess what I'm getting at is this card ever even close to playable if Ajax doesn't exist? Or is this another case of we are running a card for another card?
Yeah, I mean, I would say like Hazmat Ajax are definitely, joined at the hip,
Hmm.
and Hazmat, like if this was the type of list people were playing before Ajax was out, which it kind of was, like, right, there was like the Doc Ock Magic version of this Iron
Yeah.
Fist Dagger Ghost Spider stuff, but then there was also like the Sage Iron Man Ravona version of a little bit ago that Stefan and Big Baby and Husky and stuff were all working on, which is closer to how this deck plays because it's looking to be a big turn 6 finisher. But that did not play Hazmat, right? Because it just wasn't worth it. It didn't make enough sense, especially when you're running Iron Man and stuff. So I would say Hazmat is definitely just like here because of Ajax. But the fact that she is actually just so nice because sometimes Hazmat's just like insane on her own. Like if you're playing, slow all game and you're putting goblins on your opponent's board and then you drop Prio on 6 and you Hazmat, like she's affecting every lane. She's like, you can play Hazmat and Sage to one lane, and then like Iron Fist, a Dagger to another, and Hazmat just afflicted that one with 4, and your Sage lane with 4, and then all of that stuff when Ajax is on the board and like you drop priority on 6 just feels absolutely insane. Like the value that Hazmat is giving you outside of just buffing your Ajax in this list is so crazy because since you're looking to do all of your stuff on turn 6 and like you're playing to drop priority a lot just because that's how you get the most out of like your Dagger and your Hazmat and your Sage. Hazmat can just be like a 2 like 11 a lot of the time, like without Ajax on the board.
Recently nerfed Ravona Renslayer definitely fell off as a piece of a mid-range deck in favor of Gwenpool. She doesn't really sort of act as a mid-range core in the way that she used to, thanks to Gwenpool being adopted widely by basically every Thena deck that is seeing play, unless they're a Darkhawk deck that really wants to lean into that. But generally hope Gwenpool have supplanted Ravona as the mid-range core. Hope Gwenpool don't really work when you're playing goblins. So how much worse than that at being a mid-range deck? Like, if you think of this as an inverted mid-range deck, right? Your Thena is your dagger. You're still an Ajax Hazmat deck. You're clogging your opponent instead of building up your own board. On base, how much worse are you at just points than a typical Thena deck in that context?
I don't know. I mean, I would say in general, I would say you probably go pretty even with them in points. Like if it was like deck versus deck, I would say a lot of time you're going pretty even with them. And clog stuff is nice into Thena stuff a lot of the time just because they play movers. So like clogging like the lane where they're not setting up their stuff is like super restrictive for their late game, and it can actually like kneecap them a lot in terms of options and power output later in the game. But then also the Athena Kitty stuff relies on you drawing like hitting your stuff every step of the way. Whereas because this deck is looking to do like turn 5 into just massive whatever you want on turn 6, it's kind of it's better at just like coasting through the mid game and then having like a chance late game, whereas like it's the exact opposite with the Athena stuff, right? Like I'm saying daggers are versus Angela. Well, if they hit the early game and they're playing strong throughout the entire game, but they don't have a good late game, it's a little bit harder for you to gauge whether or not you should stay or whether or not it's winnable, because they like you can't really see that. They can see that you have had a bad early game, but you can't really see if they've had a good early game that you're going to be able to win later in the game. So that's like the difference between the way the decks shape their power. And then obviously Thena stuff is like a lot more focused on what it is doing. It plays like probably two interaction pieces, where this deck is like you're very hyper fixated on most of the things your opponent's doing, because almost everything you're doing relies on that, right? Like your
Yeah.
hazmat is afflicting their stuff to buff your stuff, your goblins are clogging their board, your dagger is getting buffed off of their cards. So uh, yeah, that's like the difference between them. I'd say this deck is just more concerned with what their opponent is doing and less about specifically just building up all of its own stuff, and you're reacting to that constantly.
Speaking of recently nerfed cards, White Widow might just be like the freest include of all time in a deck like this. The fact that you don't have to choose between White Widow and Kate Bishop is actually kind of nice, because in a lot of other decks I am being forced to make that choice, and I have been choosing Kate Bishop, I think, a decent amount of the time. But having both of them means that you have these multiple additional clog free rolls. Kate Bishop giving you the acid arrow, White Widow just being a 2/2 that clogs your opponent. Has this reduced, because one of the clog cards that I noticed is not in here is Debris. Does having Kate and White Widow reduce the necessity of sort of clunkier, weirder cards like Debris in a deck like this?
Yeah, I would say 100% it does, having both of those cards, and especially on the ladder. Like I feel like Hawkeye, Kate Bishop, that is a very strong ladder card, because like you're low rolling and high rolling arrows a lot in this list specifically. Like I know Acid Arrow is probably easily the best arrow, but outside of that, like uh, Grapple Arrow is obviously extremely good for this list, as it pretty much acts as like a better Iron Fist number two, better Iron Fist number two, and then uh having White Widow and the Acid Arrow and the Ravona discount on the goblins, I think is like the perfect uh clog package to have in a deck that is looking to finish on turn 6, because you could play Debris and you could play Doc Ock and stuff like that, but it gets like really cumbersome and much too slow for a 6-turn game. So the cheaper like White Widow, Acid Arrow, Green Goblin, just tighter package of clog cards is like way more suiting for a turn 6 finisher deck like this.
So this is going to be less a question about Kate Bishop in this deck specifically, and more a question about Kate Bishop, period. Is this card as good as she has felt to me? Like, whenever I play a deck, I'm like, I should probably put Kate Bishop in here. Like, the only decks I really don't want to put her in are like Arishem and Sandman, and I'm not even sure I'm right about Arishem at the very least. I'm not even sure I'm right about Sandman. Even like this is just a card that baseline is giving you two things that have about 4 power. That's pretty much what she does. She's a 2/3 that puts like two. I don't know. I think the average you get from her is probably like imagine having two Ant-Men generated to your hand. And it's just like, that's just really good. Like, it's just a really good thing. You're generally interested in that. Or like Blade without the downside or whatever, right? That's kind of what she's giving you on average. And it's just like, oh, how valuable is the fact that you don't have, like, she allows you to build a deck like this almost. Like, this card filling up your hand and filling up your curve and giving you things to do, and some of them already synergize with what you do, and you don't need all of them to synergize with what you do. You have the clog one, which is really good. You have the move one, which is really good. And that's enough. You don't need all of them to synergize with what you do, because even the low rolls are still stuff. How constant is that in Kate Bishop decks? And how much is that representative of her shape as a card being one that goes or is optimized in decks like this, as opposed to in a deck that already fills its curve very reliably like Sandman?
Yeah, I mean, I would say like the main strength of what she's doing with like the generated cards and stuff is like if she is generating you uh sorry, if she's generating you stuff to do like in the middle of the game, it's kind of like what people want Jeff to be in a lot of decks. That's what Kate is to me. It's like what people want Jeff to be in a lot of decks, which is like, oh, I don't know, the curve is a little weird. Let's just put Jeff in there,
Yeah.
you know. But like Kate is like the much more realized version of a card like that, where it's like in this deck, if Kate didn't exist, I would say, you know, Jeff would probably fit in here decently because you're like, I don't know, you know, we need stuff to do. Let's put Jeff in there. But Kate is like just she's so much better at that because she's
Yeah.
giving you something to do on turn two, and then she's giving you these one energy plays to pad your curve on later turns. So she definitely feels like people kind of act like Jeff is like this Swiss Army knife of a card. And Kate is pretty much just like Snow Garden mixed with Jeff, right? Like she's like giving you stuff to do. She's kind of like the Swiss Army knife utility stuff. And she's also like, I don't know, we need stuff to do. Let's just put that card in there.
The goblins in here, specifically Green Goblin, is one that I consider the stronger of the two. Do you share that opinion? And could you talk about why specifically that is? How much of it is related to just the blue number here being 3 versus 5?
Yeah, I mean, I would say his energy cost really is like what lets him shine, and him being a three is kind of just like it's good, but the reason it's good is because when you play Ravona, he's worth two. So
Yeah.
like comboing, you know, like a Ravona, and then you can do like Green Goblin White Widow or Green Goblin Acid Arrow White Widow all on turn five is also an insane like out of nowhere clog play that you can do. Uh Him being cheaper is just like it's really good because it allows you to make use of your bottom end that you draw later alongside him in the mid game. Whereas Hobgoblin, you kind of just have to like put that stuff at the wayside because you're like, well, I'm gonna play this card this turn. Green Goblin allows you to get all your other smaller pieces into play alongside furthering like your clog game plan and stuff.
Yeah, Green Goblin stacks better in the mid game, where Hobgoblin is your entire turn most of the time.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I have seen on Untapped, sorting top 10% infinite, like 50 games played, very low sample size. Sometimes I just mess around in there because I like knowing what's doing really well with like one player, basically. A version of this deck that replaces Sage with Nocturne. You think that's probably unplayable? Because like my read on this is Sage is the backup turn 6 card. And so like in an ideal world, if you're drawing super well, you won't need this card. But if you're not drawing super well, you might need this card. Talk to me a little bit about that dynamic.
Yeah, I mean, in general, my style of deck building, I am a large fan of building in redundancies because I enjoy playing consistent decks, but oftentimes I'm formulating this kind of novel game plan that has trouble, like, you really need to draw it to win the game. So that leaves me a lot of time when I'm building decks to save or just like make some includes for specifically the sake of redundancy. And I would say Sage is is really, kind of embodies that in this deck where it's like if you have, Ajax and then Hazmat, Iron Fist Dagger, Ghost Spider on turn 6, you don't really need the Sage. But at the same time, if you do not have like one of those cards, then Sage can just be massive and game winning for you. And she is like extremely strong in decks that are looking to put cards on your opponent's side of the board because you can just like it's kind of like paint by numbers where you have Sage in your hand and you're like, what lane am I going to target? What lane am I going to clog? And she kind of cuts out the middleman there. Where you're like, well, they have, I have a 2-drop and they have a 2-drop in this lane, but I have a 2-drop and they have a 3-drop in this lane. So I guess I'll start clogging
Ooh.
this lane so that later my Sage, is bigger over here. And Sage is also just nice because like I said, like if you're playing a clog game plan and then your backup plan is either like Ajax or Sage, it's like clog plus Ajax or clog plus Sage. Sage is also really good because she gets discounted by Ravona, where if you do not have something super strong in your hand to play on turn 5, a lot of times you just pivot to like, I guess I'm just gonna YOLO a Hobgoblin or something, and you still need a little bit more, or like a Green Goblin or something, you still need a little bit more to win that lane. And Sage is also very good at that because like even if you clog a lane where you're like down 6 power, if you have your clog cards on that side of the lane, she's just going to be massive. Um, and the same could be said for like a dagger or something, but it's just much more of a restricted play line. And Sage is just like I said, she's a very, very good backup plan to have. And a lot of the time, she's your backup plan, and it's not even like you didn't draw it. It's just like you need to pivot, and like your clog lane is just too far behind. And she's like, okay, well, I guess I'm not doing, Ajax stuff this game. I'm just gonna have to pivot into like, your Ghost Spider Dagger turn 6 plus like a Sage because
Yeah.
you need to like cap off your clogged lane.
I think in this deck, more than in any other deck, Cassandra Nova is a tech card. But I also think that like this is the kind of deck where sometimes you're just like, I like having something good to do on turn 3. I'm a big fan of doing something good on turn 3. But this is an Arishem tech card. And I think a lot of people against Arishem, especially further down in the ranks, are just running her out on turn 3. And one of the things I've started doing is not doing that. But I mean, like, part of it is because the Loki you kind of, there's like a little bit of tension there where it's like, are they going to Loki you? If they Loki you, do you want to get her out earlier? But if they're not Lokiing you, this is going to be like 16 power on turn 6, and they're not going to know you have it. And they're a deck that is built to beat it if they know you have it. And so, how much of that dynamic is at play when you run into an Arishem deck with Cassandra Nova? How much does having this card, wanting to save it for turn 6 so they don't know you have it, impact the way you play your turn 6 or the rest of the game because you have all this other redundancy for turn 6? You have your Dagger Ghost Spider, you have your Hazmat, you have your Sage. At what point are you just like, all right, I'm just going to run her out there?
So yeah, I mean, I would say the only reason I'm running out a Cassandra really early against Arishem is one, if there's some, imminently urgent location like the kiln or something, it's just like a free roll. You're just like, boom, put her there, I win that lane. Or, there's some weird Camartage, what's that
Sure.
one that swaps the location? Yeah, like Camartage stuff around. Uh all that's good. Like cloning bats and stuff like that. Outside of locations, I would say the main reason that I'm running the card out early is just because I literally do not have anything to do.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, I guess this is better to just put it there and have them answer it while I'm getting my other stuff than do literally nothing.
Well, like on that subject, a lot of the times when you literally have nothing to do, it's because you have your turn 6, right? Like
yes,
your
yes,
hand is your
exactly.
turn 6, and so you don't need this on turn 6 because you know you have your
Exactly.
turn 6 already spoken for, which is why you have nothing to do right now.
Yeah. That is very true because you're constantly like holding your cards and looking to what you're gonna do on most importantly 5 and 6 in this deck. And if you have what you're gonna do in your hand, you're like, okay, well, there's no room for this later, so I'm just gonna play it now. But also it can be good. Like a lot of the time if I have against Arishem, if I have like a Sage in hand, and a Cassandra Nova in hand on turn like 3 or 4 and nothing else to do, I would much prefer playing the Sage because it kind of like it baits your opponent into thinking that like your hand isn't that crazy, and then you play like Sage, and then you do Ajax, and then you can do like Hazmat Cassandra Nova on 6 if you don't have your dagger stuff, or you can just do like the dagger stuff with Cassandra Nova. And a lot of the time they think that like it's going to be more of a passive late game from you because you're kind of like limping and tempoing out your Sage and stuff, whereas it's actually like you still have this insane lane winning 2 to 3 energy card in your hand.
So this guy's probably the biggest flex spot in the deck because of his, ironically, unflexibility or inflexibility in terms of how he's being played. I really felt like I had something with that pun, but the un-in switch kind of ruined me there. Anyway, um, what would you consider swapping Hobgoblin for? One of the cards that I wondered about was like maybe we could be a beast deck, or maybe that just like takes up too much of our time. Maybe we just like don't have the ability to be a beast deck in a deck like this. What are the cards that you're thinking about swapping in for a Hobgoblin?
Well, the top of the list definitely was Beast. I think that Hobgoblin takes up a lot of energy, and you're
Mhm.
playing him mid game, so you can kind of like see fitting a beast in there where it's like a lot of time you don't have time to do stuff in this deck because of Hobgoblin. Like if you have Ravona Hobgoblin, you're like, well, I guess I just need to run this out now. Or your turn 5, entire turn 5 play is Hobgoblin if you're missing the Ajax, which is like really pivotal moments in the deck where I could see Beast, coming in at those exact same moments and being, well, I don't have anything to do right now, but I can do like, Iron Fist, and then I can do Dagger, Ghost Spider, Beast, and then you have like the free stuff to do along with like a Sage or even an Ajax or something on turn 6. So I'd say Beast is like a card I would consider. I mean, the thing about this deck is that like I don't know how to add something else in Hobgoblin's place that really solves any other issues this deck has. And the problems Hobgoblin solves in this deck, in my experience, is just like he's yet another redundancy, but almost to the point as I would consider him like a pseudo win con, just because like if you hobgoblin a lane to cap it off, or like you hobgoblin a lane where they only have like one more slot, you can oftentimes just be like, all right, well, I won that lane. There's nothing they can do to win that lane. I'm just too big there. And then actually focus your turn 6 on like making a huge dagger or doing dagger sage stuff or whatever, Cassandra Nova versus Airsham or something like that. So he is actually very, like, he can be very, very pivotal to your winning games in the deck. I think the only other card that I could see like going so well with the deck's game plan like that is Beast. But I'm not sure about Beast just because everything I've tried with Hawkeye and Beast has felt a little awkward. And I really do like Hobgoblin in the deck. I'm kind of a Hobgoblin truther. I'm a stan of the card. I put him in a lot of my clog style decks, and I think in a deck like this where you really just need to focus heavy on one lane early game because you can just like, massive power spike turn 6, win another. Hobgoblin does shine.
Speaking of just being too big to beat, Ajax is like just the biggest guy in the game, right? Like this is just like a 22 power guy a lot of the time. And I think people sort of undersell how completely ridiculous that is because, like, yeah, some of that 22 power is coming from your guys, but also most of it's coming from their guys. And also, 22 is a really big number. I don't know if people are aware of that. It's like a really big number. I don't know how many numbers there are bigger than 22. Theoretically infinite, but there's also theoretically infinite numbers smaller than 22. Math joke. This guy is kind of irreplaceable, right?
Yes, I'm not even like I've played a lot of Ajax decks since the card came out, and he's always felt good to me. But after playing this deck, I started to think to myself, maybe Ajax is a little bit of a
Yeah,
problem.
he's like
Maybe
a little
he
busted, right? Like he's like,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Like if Airsham gets changed and it's no longer the best thing that you can possibly do, I think Ajax might be a little bit too good because there are a lot of times where I don't draw the hazmat. And I'm like, it's all good. I don't need the hazmat because they're simply going to abandon that lane because they cannot beat Ajax.
Like, how do you beat
Like,
that card? Yeah.
yeah, it's kind of crazy, and he also gives you like since he's so massive, and you can have that feeling of like I have Ajax in this lane, they have nothing in this lane. It can help you read your opponent's final turn very well because like if the right lane is hopeless and they're kind of weak in another lane, you're like, okay, well the only way they stay in this game, like I have priority or whatever. The only way they stay in is if they are going to tech card my Ajax, as they simply cannot outpower it. Like it gives you a lot of information as well, just because of how massive of an undertaking it is to answer the card. Um, and it's moments like those where, like, if you play Ajax and then you have priority and they snap, you're like, okay, they're probably gonna attack card me, so I either don't hazmat or I ghost spider him to another lane or whatever. And all of that is thanks to the fact that he is just so massive that like he almost telegraphs your opponent's late game uh because they have to answer him, and if they don't and you don't have hazmat or whatever, you can just be like, okay, well I guess they don't have the answer, I'm just going to abandon that lane because they are too and focus all my energy over here.
Shout out to Francis.
Yeah.
All right, y'all, that is going to be everything for today. Thank you so much for making it through that video. I have been KM Best. He has been Yo Woody. Check him out on Twitch and on YouTube soon. TM. We will try to get that up and running. I doubt it's going to be up and running by the time I can put a link in the description, though, unfortunately. Is that correct?
Yeah, probably not.
Probably not. Okay. All right. Thank you so much for doing this, Woody. And I hope everyone who watched this really appreciated. Now they know what this deck is and what it's trying to do. And hopefully, I actually kind of think this might be more useful for people playing against this deck because now they know what's going on and they won't get
Yeah.
caught by surprise by like the 70 power on the final turn of the game coming out of like Hazmat, Ajax, and Dagger stuff. Do you have anything you'd like to say at the end?
Um I don't think so. I think we covered a lot of the stuff about the deck very well. I guess your shout outs to, the homies,
Right.
KX, Husky, all them. Jimmy as well. Jimmy is like very, he was helpful in making the deck because he's the one that brought it up after I had literally deleted it and banished Kate from my memory. So shout out to Jimmy Dickens. And yeah, thanks everyone.
All right.